For some teams, you have that moment in time that changes everything. Like you look back at the Seahawks those years ago in the Super Bowl against the Patriots and the Malcolm Butler interception. The Seahawks were never the same after that. Easy to understand why the Atlanta Falcons, after blowing a 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl a couple years later, have never quite been the same since. And when you really look at this team under Dan Quinn as the head coach and Thomas Dimitroff as a general manager, it would be really hard to shake that stigma, because that's tough. And then you go out and find ways in the regular season to lose games that you absolutely should win. Like, it's not just a stigma, it's just like a momentum or bad vibe or bad juju thing. It is a really, really bad job, especially by the coaching staff led by Dan Quinn, to execute in key moments in time, in key spots in terms of their play calling, decision making, game plans, etc. And that's how this season was starting for the Atlanta Falcons. Like, you have a defensive-minded head coach, and your defense absolutely is god-awful atrocious. They lost their first 4 games, all giving up at least 30-plus points. You had the collapses against both Dallas and Chicago, like, were spectacularly bad, just spectacularly bad. And then the loss to Carolina, and Atlanta, to their credit, realized that, hey, Dimitroff's done some good things there in his time in Atlanta as a general manager, and Dan Quinn did some decent things during his time as a head coach. But the time had come. The time had come to move on from both of them. And that's exactly what they did. Because if you're Arthur Blank, you have to look at it and say, yeah, you know what? Nah. Like, even if this team was finding a way to win some of these games, were really better in 8-8 or 9-7. And I think he even just recently said that. Credit to him. Imagine that. How nice it would be, huh, Bears fans, to have an ownership group that owns up to just how mediocre they are and saying that that's not acceptable and things have to change. Oh, God, imagine that. But, even once you look at the firing of Dan Quinn, like, this is a team that lost 7 games by 7 points or less this year. You had the significantly bad, heartbreaking losses to Dallas and Chicago, but then you also had the one at Detroit. Like, if I could crystallize or epitomize the past couple of years of the Dan Quinn era, ERROR, if you will, for the Atlanta Falcons, it's Todd Gurley against Detroit, failing to get down, falling into the end zone, even though he's trying not to score. He ends up scoring. And somehow, some way, that becomes all Todd Gurley's fault because the Atlanta Falcons defense is so god-awful terrible that they can't stop anybody. Their play calling on that end was atrocious. Their execution was bad, and their players stink, period. And it proves out and bears out in the results. And we're blaming Todd Gurley because he scored a touchdown. Like, I get what people are saying, and I understand it. And there's a small argument to be made here, but Jesus Christ, if you got the opportunity to score the touchdown, score the touchdown. The guys on the other side of the ball, the defensive players, they are professionals too. They're getting paid to do a damn job. Do your damn job that you're being paid to do. Instead, you're in a place where you're fucking yelling at damn Todd Gurley for going down in the end zone against Detroit. And that wasn't even a Dan Quinn coach game, right? Like, it's the Falcons. Like, so it's this really bad stigma. They were 1-5 against the NFC South. So it's not surprising, really, to see him in this position where they're going to be picking in the top 5 of this upcoming NFL draft. Because offensively, no real running game. You only got 3.5 yards per carry out of Todd Gurley. You only got 9 games played out of Julio Jones. Matty Ice had a decent statistical season. But I do think, stats and numbers are one thing. Those are nice, but there are times, and I certainly saw this in the Chicago game, where there were times where the play calling let him down and was really bad, but there were also times that he could have executed a little bit better in that second half, and that would have helped the Falcons win, and he didn't do that, so they didn't. So one of those things where it almost feels like a typical Matty Ice season. Throws for about 26 touchdowns, about 4,500 yards. Those look like really good numbers, but they don't mean shit. That's not necessarily his fault. I'm just saying, like, in the grand scheme of things, they don't really mean anything. Because in part, their defense is so just awful and terrible. Like, you might look at them and say, hey, they were top 10 again in the league against the run, but why would anybody bother to waste time running against them when they could just throw on them at will all the time? They were dead, butt-naked rear last in the league against the pass, 29th overall yards allowed per game. I think his defense stunk. And it's not like they haven't placed draft pick investment on that side of the ball. over the years, or free agent money. Like, they've invested on the defense. It just stunk. It just hasn't worked. So that's why Dimitroff and Dan Quinn had to go. And what you find yourself now after this, surely for Falcons fans, what could be viewed as a disastrous and waste of time of a 2020 season, is a real pivotal moment in the Falcons franchise history. You've got this house cleaning now. You're going to have a new general manager. You're going to have a new coach. All the while, you're bringing folks into a situation where you're over $30 million over the salary cap for next year. And when you look at contract structures, according to like SpotTrack or overthecap.com, you look at the Falcons and the contract breakdowns for last year, there's not a ton of immediate relief that could come from, let's say, a bloated contract where somebody's making more than they really should, and you could just release them and get out of millions of dollars and take a smaller dead cap hit. There's just not a lot of that. So you're going to have to talk about releasing some guys, maybe several guys, reworking some contracts. Like, they got a lot of work to do to get under the cap. They are not in a good situation there at all. All the while, you're talking about a team where Matt Ryan will turn 36 this year. Julio Jones, he's getting up there. He's been in the league now for 10 seasons. Think about that. So he's in his 30s. Like, this is a team, you look at him and you start to say, this is a team that had a window and period of time. That window and period of time has closed. If you want to even try to prop it open, like, you would like to have a ton of draft pick capital, which they have pretty much a standard assortment of draft pick capital. You would want to have a ton of salary cap space. And not only do they not have a bunch of salary cap space, they don't even have some cap space. They are negative $30 million when it comes to cap space. So what the hell are they going to do? Like, what is the reasonable, viable path to this Falcons team getting better and getting better in a hurry? What is it? Tell me. Now, what you could argue is saying, hey, what happens to the Saints after Drew Brees? What happens to the Bucs after Tom Brady? Valid questions. But at that point in time, I would have more confidence in the Carolina Panthers stepping up and becoming the team that kind of runs the NFC South for a period of time more than I would Atlanta. I mean, what's their future look like? What would make this job that appealing for anybody? I know one thing that potentially would, but we'll have that conversation in a moment. So when you look at the team needs here, everybody's going to focus on defense and say they don't have a pass rush, so they need to get a pass rush, and they do. They need to get guys that can cover better in the back half of that defense, specifically the secondary. They do. They absolutely do. And don't get me wrong, they absolutely need to address that side of the ball in this draft. But you look offensively, they need somebody that could be a threat in the running game. And they don't have that. That's something they should be able to get in the draft. Good thing is, you can always seem to find those guys on day 3. The Falcons are going to need to find that type of guy on day 3. But where the biggest decision and the biggest question comes in is, what do? You were picking in the top 5. You were potentially in the shouting distance, in the launch position to be able to get a young franchise quarterback. If you're the Atlanta Falcons, how do you pass on that opportunity? How do you pass on it? After next year, Matt Ryan's contract becomes a little bit easier to get out of. I think for 2022, if they were to trade him or cut him, his cap number's like $41 million. His dead cap's $26 million, so they save about $15 million. So, I mean, you can make an argument there, like, is 2021 the last season that Matt Ryan plays in Atlanta? Or even if he does, maybe he just plays out the last other year of his contract and then he's gone? Like, Matt Ryan's 36. He's had a nice run there, 13 seasons and counting. But how much longer do you want to tie yourself to Matt Ryan? And if I'm a new general manager and a new head coach coming in, and most especially knowing the cap situation and just how much work is needed to be done on this team, like, you'd have a hard time convincing me that quarterback isn't the right selection with that 4th overall pick. Because I think it is. I think it absolutely is. You could try and get really aggressive and think you're going to hit a bunch of home runs in the draft on the defensive side of the ball, and maybe you hit a couple. But even if you do that, like, what's the real upside? What's the ceiling for this team? What's their potential? What could they truly peak at? I'm sorry, but if I'm the Falcons right now and I'm their inevitable front office, and in that draft, I've got somebody like a Zach Wilson or a Justin Fields or whatever quarterback might be available there at number 4, I got to think about taking him. Because you're going to have to remake this team anyways. You're going to have to clear out cap space somehow over the next couple of years. Having eventually a young quarterback on a rookie contract buys you time, extends that window, and gives you the flexibility to clear out some cap space. Then you've absolutely got to do it. I'm curious what Falcons fans think, because I want to be clear, it's not necessarily a reflection against Matt Ryan. It's just more about the circumstance and the reality. Like, dude is going to be 36 next year. Even if you think he's still great, how many more years of that are you really going to get? Do you want to try and squeeze 2 or 3 more great years out of Matt Ryan and then figure it out later and it still doesn't really matter? Or do you want to sit there and find a guy that you can squeeze 10, 12, 15 great years out of down the road that for the first few years will ultimately come at a much cheaper price than Matt Ryan? My Falcons fans might want to build up the defense and give it another run with Matty Ice and Julio and everything. And that can make sense. Like, there certainly could be a thought process or approach there that's what they should do. But, nah. Just like it wasn't the most popular thing when they took Matt Ryan 3rd overall in that 2008 draft. You know, it might not be the most popular decision in 2021 to do it, but I think it is absolutely the right decision. Just like it was to take Matty Ice in 2008. The absolute right decision now would be for the Atlanta Falcons to do their due diligence on the young quarterbacks and get one of them and have that blanket of security for the future. That's it. Like, that's what it comes down to. It's a real interesting, fascinating, pivotal moment in time in Falcons franchise history. Do you dive deeper into a very, very shallow pool of possibilities or potential? Or do you course correct, light a little fire maybe under Matty Ice's ass by bringing in a young quarterback, but more importantly, set yourself up for the future? I know what my answer would be. What would your answer be?